Welcome back to the Twin Spires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson here with James Scully and Vance Hansen to talk the Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup, Caravel's back-to-back losses, and more. And let's jump right into the QE2 at Keeneland, where Mawj won her U.S. debut. James, after her win, is there a Breeders' Cup race she should target, and how do you rate her chances?
Well, the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Turf is run at different distances depending on the location. It's going to be at 1.25 miles this year at Santa Anita, and given that distance, which is a little bit further than a 1.316 at Keeneland last year, I would say the Breeders' Cup Mile is the best race for her. Now, granted, she did stretch out to 9 furlongs and ran I thought, a really impressive race on Saturday, considering the 5-month layoff. Held Liddy off by about a half length or neck for the victory. And I'm not saying she couldn't get 1.25 miles effectively. I just think at this point, she's a 3-year-old filly coming back second start off the layoff. She's a proven miler. She'll relish that mile distance at Santa Anita. And I think Mawj rates as a serious win contender off of the very encouraging comeback performance, Vance.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. It sounds counterintuitive, but I think the mile is probably a better prospect for her than the Filly Mare Turf. I think one major factor is that the mile, the composition of the field could cut up again very much so this coming week, because a lot of major contenders will be competing in the British Champions Day card at Ascot on Saturday. And I have a feeling that a number of them are not going to be very willing afterwards to turn around on 2 weeks' notice and ship to California to run in the Breeders' Cup Mile. So we're talking about horses like Paddington, Inspiral, Kinross, Caldine, and I think Tahira has already been kind of eliminated from consideration from the Breeders' Cup already. So the mile isn't going to be as competitive, I think, as it looked like it could have been a few weeks ago. So I think Mawj would probably fit that a lot better. You mentioned the distance, 1.25 miles. She was getting a little tired, I thought, at the end of her race at 9 furlongs at Keeneland. But, as you mentioned, she was coming off a long layoff. She deserved to be a little fatigued going that far. It was the farthest she had run before. It was a very good effort, but I don't necessarily think that suits her stepping up and trip to 1.25 miles at Santa Anita. I think being a front runner, I think the projected pace scenario on the Filly Mare Turf isn't going to be as ideal as it was at Keeneland. And also, there's a very serious Coolmore filly named Warm Heart, who I think is really penciled in for the Filly Mare Turf. She's got an impeccable record so far this year at longer distances, and I think she would probably be a filly that Mawj might find too tough to handle at 1.25 miles. What do you think, Ashley?
I agree with you on the mile, and trainer Saeed bin Sarur said, it looks to me she has plenty of speed as a miler, and she made it to today 9 furlongs. We'll see. The mile might be the best for her, but he wants to decide closer to the race. I am curious, though. You mentioned, taking out the European contingent, we have Up to the Mark and Master of the Seas potentially in the mile. You feel like Mawj can beat either of those horses?
Yeah, those are two very serious horses also to consider for the mile. They're in contention for the mile. Yeah, Mawj would really have to step up her game, I think, to beat either one of those two.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Up to the Sea, will be the Godolphin horse will definitely be in the mile. We'll see what happens with Up to the Mark, but if he goes to the mile, it's like Van said, it's going to be a tough challenge in either place. I just think the mile distance is probably a little bit of a better fit, Ashley, for Mawj.
And I wanted to mention too, Mawj is a half sister to Modern Games. And if Mawj were to win the Breeders' Cup Mile, she and Modern Games would become the only siblings to win that race. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what connections end up deciding ahead of the Breeders' Cup. But let's stick to the Breeders' Cup and talk about the Turf Sprint, which Caravel won last year as a 43-1 upset against the boys. She kicked off 2023 with 3 straight wins, but she's dropped her last 2. Any concern after those 2 losses? We'll go with Vance.
Well, on the one hand, for the second consecutive race, Caravel caught a turf course that had some cut in it, and that's just not her preferred kind of ground. She's going to get the kind of ground she really appreciates at Santa Anita. On the other hand, she certainly would have asserted herself over that Franklin Stakes field, I think, 6 months to a year ago, despite not getting the kind of ground that she liked. And so that makes me lean towards the proposition that perhaps she's kind of lost a step over the last couple of months. And if true, it's understandable. She is closing in on 7 years of age. I mean, she started really hitting her peak at the end of her 5-year-old campaign and now at the age of 6. So, at any rate, the time to have Caravel from a betting perspective was last year when she was a 43-1 shot in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. She's rarely offered values since and probably won't in a few weeks. So, based on what we've seen just in her last couple of starts, she might be a horse you might consider fading in the turf sprint. What do you think, James?
Yes, I agree. I think it's fair to question whether Caravel will be in the same form at Santa Anita that she was at Keeneland last year. Now, Vance made some very good points. She just got beat a neck, finished the next second in that Franklin Stakes, and her supporters will point to the off turf in the last 2 races, how she loves firm ground, and the argument could be made she's eligible to rebound with her, a true performance on November 4th at Santa Anita. My issue is she's not displaying the same speed, not only in these 2 setbacks, but even in that Jaipur. I thought she was fortunate that day. She got up late to narrowly win that grade 1 on the Belmont Stakes undercard. But I think that might have been the first chink in her armor. She was on the lead in all of her 4 wins from last October through April when she was in just razor sharp form. Nobody could beat her to the front. She hasn't shown the same speed in these last 3 starts. She was rating in 3rd on Sunday. And I think that that's a sign that she's not going to be as sharp as she was last year in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, Ashley.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned her speed figures. She got an 85 in the Troy facing the boys. She was a 3-length 4th. And then she brought her speed figure back up to a 93 in this race. She won the Franklin last year ahead of her Breeders' Cup win. And again, only beaten a neck. So there's still a chance that she's going to rebound in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Looking at her competition, I think probably Highfield Princess is probably the front runner to win that race. And I do feel like at the 5 furlong distance, some of the runners pointed toward the turf sprint are a little inconsistent at that 5 furlong distance. So I'm not going to write off Caravel, but certainly her class ratings have dropped in her last 2 and her speed figures as well. So not at the top of her game at the moment.
I do have to interject really quickly. I think Highfield Princess is bypassing the Breeders' Cup this year in Hong Kong. So
yeah, go ahead, Vance. The
No,
competition might not be that tough. Sorry, Vance. I jumped right in on you. But regardless, it's still going to be a very competitive race, and she's going to have to be at the top of her game to beat the males next time, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, what else caught your all's eye this week? And we'll go with James.
Well, I'll mention first off at Keeneland on Saturday, after a pair of seconds, including a runner-up effort in the 1-mile sapling stakes at Monmouth Park, Dornick broke through with a very, very sharp maiden win. He basically went right to the lead at the break with Luis Saez, rated on showed the way on a short lead, and then drew off in the stretch to win going away by 6 1/4 lengths. His 95 Brisnet speed rating came back strong for a 2-year-old maiden race, so very encouraging moving forward. Full brother to this year's Kentucky Derby winner, Mawj. So a very promising prospect for trainer Danny Gargan. And I also want to make a quick mention, trainer Charlie Appleby. He's won the last 2 runnings of the Breeders' Cup Mile. He's won the last 2 runnings of the Breeders' Cup Turf. He has been absolutely on fire in recent Breeders' Cups, and he has been heating up here of late. Last weekend in North America, he won the Canadian International with Nation's Pride. This past weekend, he won the Sycamore on Saturday with Bold Act at Keeneland and the Sands Point at Aqueduct with Eternal Flame. And Charlie Appleby won 3 stakes races over the weekend at Newmarket, Ancient Wisdom, Arabian Coin, and Dance Sequence. So he's been on fire of late, and just with his stable heating up at this time of year, I think that's a good sign for his Breeders' Cup prospects. Vance, sorry.
Well, the horse and the race, a lot of people in the Western racing world were talking about this past weekend was City of Troy's performance in the Dewhurst Stakes at Newmarket, their top 2-year-old event. City of Troy lived up to the hype and more, winning in emphatic style by 3.5 lengths. Now, the connections within the Coolmore camp are referring to him as our Frankel. Others are pondering whether he is potentially the best horse Aidan O'Brien has ever trained. So that's extremely high praise, obviously, also quite a high bar and equally a high burden to carry into the winter months for City of Troy. Now, it remains to be seen whether he is indeed the next Frankel and whether those comparisons hold up. But at least he's looking like an odds-on favorite for the 2,000 guineas at Newmarket next spring, which is a relatively rare thing, I think, for a race more than 6 months away. We'll see if a serious challenger to him for the guineas comes up in the trials that will be run there in April, but I kind of rather doubt it. City of Troy looks like a very special Colton animal, and hopefully he'll won't have any setbacks of any kind, and we'll see how really good he is as a 3-year-old. Ashley, how about you?
I'm going to bring it back over to North America and talk about the Cup and Saucer Stakes at Woodbine, where My Boy Prince won fairly easily in this race and now pointed toward the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf at a mile. He'll potentially face his stablemate Can Group, who's 2 for 2 on turf and racing 7 furlongs and 1 1/16 of a mile. Also got a Gate Road in there, 2 for 2 on turf, and Carson's Run, a very good horse on turf. But My Boy Prince won gate to wire, not really asked for much until he entered the home stretch, and then ran away by more than 4 lengths to win this race. Also has a 14-length win in another stakes race and beat 8 rivals in this a mile and a 16th event. I also wanted to mention that Cairo Prince is the sire of My Boy Prince and also the sire of Tony Ann, who won the Franklin. Cairo Prince now has 8 stakes winners in 2023, and also his daughter Cairo Consort was 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf last year, has now won the Swedish Chant and the Ginger Brew Stakes at Gulfstream in 2023, and Byland and Sea, also a multiple stakes winner for Cairo Prince. So certainly a very good year for that sire. And now My Boy Prince might have a chance in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf as well. What do y'all think about his chances?
I haven't unfortunately didn't get to see a replay of the Cup and Saucer. I'm gonna have to go back and check him out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in the
I
same boat,
trust your
Ashley.
judgment on that, Ashley. He's
Yeah.
definitely one to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I still got to do a little bit of work on those races as well, Ashley. I will jump back to Vance's City of Troy. He referenced how the Coolmore guys saying, comparing him to Frankel. And, there was a celebration out at Ashford with the Justify. I mean, Justify has had opera singer who we talked about in recent weeks and has this City of Troy. He had his first grade 1 winner at a mile and a quarter this summer. He just couldn't be any hotter coming into the fall.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have today for the Racing Roundtable. Catch us on Thursday for the Twin Spires Jury, and be sure to capitalize on that promo code we have going on this month with the Jury, all caps, for a 15% boost on your win wager on races we talk about in the Jury. And of course, we'll be back next Tuesday for another edition of the Racing Roundtable. We'll see you then.